All right. Now, for tomorrow, you're finishing The Catcher in the Rye. So tomorrow we got a reading check quiz for the whole entire, not for the whole entire book. It's going to be for the second half. So there's not questions referencing to what you already read with chapters 1 to 16. But from 17 through, I think 26 is the last chapter number, we'll have a reading check quiz for tomorrow. Today, and I know some of you have them, and if you have them, I'll come around and collect them. If not, you do have until the end of the day to submit. If you want to do your to-be verb rewrite for the Grapes of Wrath, you have until the end of the day. If you have a study hall or you have a lunch that you need to go to the library to kind of take care of that stuff, that's fine. You can just drop them off with me. If you have them now, I will take them. So, Amanda, I know you have.
Can I borrow time in the garage so I can read it during study hall? Because I forgot mine at home and I wanted to read it.
So if you still want to submit these things to me, that is perfectly fine. I just would need it by the end of the day. Hannah mentioned that I put in the incorrect grade for her when it came to Catcher the Rye multiple choice, and that was one point that I wanted to make. Make sure anytime that we do something where there is scaled scoring, don't be afraid to double check your score to make sure I did put in the correct one. Because yeah, it's happened before where I'll accidentally put in like what the actual number that you got right as opposed to the scale. So tomorrow is probably when you're going to get back your multiple choice, like your Scantrons for what we did on Friday. Double check those in Power School to make sure that I put in your scale score as opposed to the incorrect one. If I put in the wrong one, let me know, and then she can just give me the Scantron like she did back and fix them. I haven't tried to get on the Power School in a while because it was down this morning, so I don't know if it'll happen today. It might happen tomorrow whenever it gets fixed. Speaking of Power School, though, because I don't really know what you see when you log on, your multiple choice from last week, Catcher in the Rye, which you did Wednesday, Thursday, and then the multiple choice that you did on Friday, both of those are in. And they show up as being out of 31 points and 24 points because those were the number of questions. I did have the value. I weighted it at 50%. So rather than you having 55 points worth of AP multiple choice questions, you have 27.5 points of AP multiple choice questions, 15.5 and 12. And the simple reason was I thought 55 points was too many for at the point where we were in the year for AP multiple choice questions because people still struggle with them early on. So it did not change like Heart of Darkness, where let's say you had a 13 out of 24. It's not that you now have a 13 out of 12, but rather than it counting as a 13 out of 24 point value, it counts as a 6.5 out of 12. So the percentage stays the same, but it's like it wasn't worth nearly as many points. Just again, because it's the first time we're doing them, or early parts of us doing them beginning of the year. Beginning of the year, most people find the AP multiple choice questions to be difficult. And what better way to test your writing ability on a test than through multiple choice questions? I can't think of any better way to assess your writing ability than multiple choice questions. Not one possible way better than multiple choice questions to test Katie's writing ability. Whoever came up with that idea was a genius. Really smart. Smarter than I clearly would be. Not a fan of them, but they are what they are. So we have to deal with them. I know it doesn't seem on October the 3rd that this would be a true statement. By the end of the year, honestly, our strength on that AP exam compared to national scores, it's the multiple choice. We really steamroll multiple choice compared to what typical students do. Why? I don't know, but it will happen. Probably around January is when you'll start to feel more comfortable with them. But we'll do things like this throughout the course of the year. It's not going to be an every week issue where you're going to have multiple choice questions coming your way. So last week was a little heavy with them. We'll step back from them. We'll have some more coming a little bit later on in the year. Last period, in first period, we went over the first passage on the multiple choice. I recorded it. That's going to be posted online. I don't have enough time to go over both passages with each class. With you folks in 7th period, I'm going over the second passage. I'll record it, put it online. So when you get your Scantrons back, if the second passage actually wasn't a problem for you, or based on us going over it, everything makes sense, but that first passage was an issue, you can take a look at the explanations and responses online, and I'll show that to you again tomorrow. But that would be a way to kind of clarify any issues that you may not have. Week from today, you don't have school on this day. You're excited. Even more exciting is when you come back on the 11th, you have a TWA. High five.
Oh.
Come on, there you go. Next Tuesday, a week from tomorrow, you're gonna have a DRQ. We haven't done one of those before. It's gonna be coming from an AP exam, so it has nothing to do with the catcher in the rye. Yes? Oh, I thought you called my name. I heard you say, oh my God.
No, that was Tim. Tim said that last year.
I really appreciated that.
On Wednesday, I will give you the prompt that you will be writing your essay for. Okay? We're not going to talk about it, but I'll give it to Noah, I'll give it to all of you on Wednesday so you can plan how you want to answer that question on Tuesday. So, Tuesday of next week, you're going to have that DRQ. The following Monday, which is the 17th, that's when we're going to do our Catcher in the Rye essay. That one will also be in class TWA. You will get that prompt about a week in advance. That one we will talk about a little bit in class. But your next two writing assignments are both going to be in class, but you'll have prompt in advance, so it's not going to be a total surprise as to what's going on. Amanda, you go on question 13 now? Any questions on anything? We're good? Okay.
Slide that over. When you take the AP exam, and you have, as we said earlier, I said earlier, those wonderful multiple choice questions that make so much sense to ask. You're going to have 4 passages, about 12 to 15 questions for each passage. Generally, of those 4 passages, one of them you're going to probably look at as being fairly easy. 2 of them, I would say, you'll kind of go run-of-the-mill in the middle. And one, not that you'll call it difficult, but you'll probably look at one as being a little bit more challenging than the others. You had 2 passages on Fridays. I took both of them from AP exams, from separate exams, put them together to make the 24. They had a few more questions than the 12, but I thought 24 was a good number. My guess is you'd probably consider each one of those to be on the more challenging level if you took that AP exam. I think these would probably be the more difficult passages that would show up. Beginning of the year, I like doing the more difficult passages early on. I don't want to give Dylan a false sense of security, okay, this is easy, and then in February give him the really difficult ones. It's like when I do Keystone testing with my 10th graders. I give them AP exams and I tell them it's a Keystone test. So when the real Keystone test, it's that terrible. Awful. Mr. Tinko did the same thing.
Did he?
Yeah, we made them together.
I didn't know.
We changed a couple things with them, because like Keystone, you only have 4 options, A through D. So like we eliminated some and we reworded the answers, but they were basically AP exam type questions. So the idea, when you take the real thing, it doesn't seem, maybe nearly as bad as what some folks would expect. So they were a little bit more difficult passages. I would think people would call them more difficult partially because they're old. And of the 4 passages, 3 should be 20th century and more recent, so 20th, 21st. 1 would come from at least the 19th century or earlier, so 1800s or earlier. So both of these, Gibbon and, which is we're going to look at the second passage, and the John Donne passage would be coming from before 1900. So the word choice is going to be a little bit more difficult or unfamiliar. The syntax might be a little bit unfamiliar, and that's to be expected. Throughout the course of the year, we're going to be reading a variety of texts, some recent, like The Catcher in the Rye, some older, Heart of Darkness, and certainly some much older than that, so that you kind of get used to that type of language, type of text, type of prose, and poetry, so that it doesn't seem quite as unfamiliar when you would take it on an AP exam. Anybody feel confident enough to try to give a quick little summary as to what's going on in that passage? And that could be not even summary, but these are things that I took note of. He was spending a lot of time discussing this idea, and could even mention that.
He basically talks about how the pagans ignored the whole rising of Christ, and it talks about how all of the Roman Empire, how they all, even though there's all this data about historical events, they ignored this big giant event.
Okay, yeah, and pretty much that event being the Passion Crucifixion that takes place. They're looking at a lot of what type of data, I guess. There's a lot of signs. Natural phenomenon that are taking place, lunar eclipses and whatnot. And essentially boils down to, if all of these ancient scientists have agreed that this event happened, this event happened, why don't they make reference to hours of darkness, at the time of Christ's death. The conclusion that he comes to, therefore, is since none of the scientists ever mentioned it, I therefore must assume it did not happen. This passage is difficult because people will read it one of two ways. Him arguing it did not happen or him arguing that it did happen. If you take the wrong stance, that's going to wreak havoc on your answers. And so that's where some of that difficulty certainly can come from. So when people go, Mr. Kane, do I need to read the passage? Yes. Should I really? Yes. But what if read the passage? Yes, it takes time. But if you get used to doing a closer reading within a small amount of time, it makes the chances of you getting an answer correct jump up exponentially. Keep in mind, you get rewarded for correct answers. You do not get any points deducted for an incorrect answer. Skipping and choosing incorrectly, it's the same thing. So should I guess? Yeah, because you have a better chance of getting it right than if you don't answer it. Plus, here's my fear. What happens if Cody skips number 14? I'm afraid that on his Scantron answer booklet, he will not skip 14. And when you get to the end on 55 and you're bubbling in 54, you're going to have that, uh-oh, what just happened kind of moment. Where your Scantron and your test might not match up. Which is why I would definitely keep track of your answers on here. Because if you do have that moment, at least you have a record as to what your answers were. Alright, so number 13. The use of supine in line 1 seems to imply that the inattention of the pagan and philosophic world was, and you are now answering.
You have my Scantron.
Yeah, I didn't pass it back.
Well, can I see so I can write my answer?
No, because then you're going to know if it's right or wrong.
Just throw out random stuff.
That'd be terrible. That's why on the board, it was make sure you keep track of your answers.
Alright, Mr. Kane, what's your favorite number 1 through 5?
You mean my favorite letter, A through E?
No, your favorite number 1 through 5.
7.
Okay. Somebody B than me.
What do you know? D just bumped up to 33%. How about that?
That's right.
What's the problem with the question in itself? Not problem, but what's certainly going to make it a little bit more difficult?
Supine.
Why?
Because I don't know what that means.
How dare you not know what that word means? Anyone have a definition for supine? Supernatural. How shall we excuse? All right, so take a look at the context because we're in line 1. How shall we excuse the supine inattention of the pagan and philosophic world to those evidences which were presented by the hand of omnipotence? I would say excuse and inattention are probably the two words that might kind of help a little bit. If a person is being inattentive or exhibiting inattention, what would we maybe argue? He or she does not care. And supine basically means lethargic, kind of lazy. So if we're going with that, how shall we excuse the lethargic, lazy inattention of the pagan and philosophic world? Which one now seems to be screaming correct answer? You'd be going E. So I would say indifference and inattention might kind of help you out a little bit. The idea of how shall we excuse, how shall we come up with a reason for this? And we end up going with lethargic. Now, Dylan was making the point that, okay, there's all this data, all these evidences, all these exhibit A, B, and C, but they are not agreeing that this event happened. Well, if we're saying that they did not see it, they're indifferent, part of the argument would be, well, they simply don't care about it, which would be that lethargic indifference, until he kind of ends up coming up with his own conclusion. So having an idea as to what's the passage about in the first place is going to help, but certainly supine is going to be difficult. There is not a list of master vocabulary that you can study before the AP exam, where supine is going to be that one S word. Certainly some classes like language enrichment help. Us doing a variety of readings can help. But there are simply going to be questions probably about words that we're unfamiliar with, and it's just simply trying to use the context clues to the best of our ability that we can. Keep in mind, the goal is to bat even, 500. You get 1 out of every 2 right. That's passing. So it's not that you have to get 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. If you're in that 5 out of 10 range on one of the more difficult passages, you're in good shape. If you're not, it's one passage, it's a limited scope of questions, and it's also October the 3rd. So I also wouldn't beat yourself too much up over, one passage.
If you get like, say 100 on one of the passages and the 5 out of 10 on like a second passage, how does that affect your overall score?
Well, I mean, it's each passages don't outweigh other ones. It's simply on the number of questions that are going to be asked. So it's going to be in that 55 ballpark. So if you get 100, if you get 12 out of 12 on this one, and the rest you bat 500, you're going to be probably in that neighborhood of like 31, 32 out of 55. Which will put you like right around that 4. Yeah, you're a little over 60%. You're right on that 3 to 4 cusp. So yeah, it can certainly go well. At the same time, it doesn't mean you have to beat yourself up over getting 4 out of 12 right, because there are going to be a lot of other passages coming your way. Worst case it happens, you don't pass the AP exam, and you just spend the rest of your life in purgatory as an AP English teacher going over the exam with countless other students for the next 30 years of your life. So
you're calling this class purgatory?
yes, I did.
The slogan's the horror.
That's not bad.
No, purgatory is always not a bad thing.
Just depends, I guess, where you are in that
It's just
purgatory.
kind of a middle room.
You're in the holding area. As your exam scores go, oops, hold on, I missed one. Hold on, there we go.
Skip this.
I did. The sentence beginning, the lane walked, lines 6 to 9. And notice, the questions tend to go in chronological order. You will get some about the passage as a whole, but for the most part, you work your way through the passage. So that sentence beginning, the lame walked, is related to the sentence that precedes it in that it, and you got to explain what it does. So, we have this sentence, the lame walked, but what other sentence do we have to look at? The one before it. So make sure you read that one before it. During the age of Christ, of his apostles and their first disciples, the doctrine which they preached was confirmed by innumerable prodigies. First sentence. Now we're looking at the ones for 6 to 9. The lame walked, the blind saw, the sick were healed, the dead were raised, demons were expelled, the laws of nature were frequently suspended, and JT passed his AP exam. Hey, you matched the highlighter color. That's nice. What does the lame walk sentence do for that previous sentence? And you'd already answered. We got 38% going B, 38% going C, 19% going D. So certainly B and C tend to be the front runners at this point. Any arguments for B or C?
Well, it does help to explain, so that's why it could be B.
Explain what?
What is meant by the age of Christ.
Okay, how so?
It's
Yeah, it said all about what went on.
Okay.
What? I don't have my Scantron with me, so I don't know my actual answer.
Lame walked, blind saw, sick were healed, dead were raised, demons were expelled, just like in Legion. We talked about him with Catcher in the Rye. All of these things are what? I wouldn't just say evidence, but they are... I think someone said it. They're examples. Of what?
A general statement.
The doctrine which they preached was confirmed by innumerable prodigies or miracles, such as the lame walked, the blind saw, the sick were healed, dead were raised, all of those things. So it provides examples to support a general statement. It gives you some details about maybe what was taking place during the age of Christ, but the lame walked down to suspended for the benefit of the church. That doesn't explain what we mean by the age of Christ. The age of Christ is when these things happen. That statement's not made. During the age of Christ, the doctrine which they preached was confirmed or proved by several miracles. Then that next sentence, 6 to 9, mentions what all of those miracles essentially were. So that's where you're getting provide support for that general statement. Miracles occurred.
Wait.
It's okay. Yeah, ask questions if you're... It does not say miracles. It says confirmed by innumerable prodigies, which is going kind of like supine is going to be a synonym for lethargic. It's going to mean the same thing as miracles. And part of the issue, and we had on the first passage had more questions like this, where we would say, what can be inferred from the passage? So you'll have questions that what can you reasonably guess or assume from the passage? You don't have nearly as many questions as to who is the main character, what is the overall point of view that you can point to for a direct answer. You have to kind of come up with support. In the context of the passage, which of the following presents the sharpest contrast to that phrase, supine inattention, which we refer to in line 1? Now, certainly, an answer for this is probably going to depend upon what you put for number 13. So which one would be the sharpest contrast for lethargic indifference? Well, if you get that one right, most of you are recognizing what's going to be the opposite of lethargic indifference? There you go. D.
Oh man, I got 13 wrong. I got 15
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of a what's going on moment. But I mean, if you are lethargically indifferent, this one, you cannot be fatigued. Your curiosity will not wear you out is going to be the opposite of I'm lazy, I don't care. So that contrast would certainly exist. One thing that you could do is, I guess, kind of run through them if you were really stuck. Hey, are there any two of these that really mean the opposite that might lead you to E and D then for 13 and 15 being the correct response? Number 16, the laws of nature were frequently suspended for the benefit of the church. Contributes which of the following to the sentence? So we're taking a look at this part right here. Laws of nature frequently suspended for the benefit of the church. A, B, and E all have 27%. C has 13%. D has 7%. So we're kind of all over the place. D has the least amount of responses, but A, B, and E are certainly all together. So we got reinforces reverent tone, seeks to persuade the reader to believe in the age of miracles, causes the reader to doubt the sincerity of Christians, and then the other two. Any cases to be made. I guess for all five we could say. Although D does not get mentioned as much. No. And 16 is a tough question. This is one of the ones that for this passage gets missed the most. The lame walked, the blind saw, and not this year, I mean like in years past as well. Sick were healed, dead were raised, demons were expelled, and the laws of nature were frequently suspended for the benefit of the church. What do we mean if we're going to say the laws of nature are suspended? It would be really cool if I dropped the pen and it floated. Not bounced, I'm using the force or whatever. So the law of nature is it's going to fall. Gravity's going to pull it in. But yeah, it's a miracle. He's got that floating pen thing going, and then we start looking around for fishing line and string, and how's he necessarily doing that? Smoke and mirrors. So laws of nature, miracles, frequently suspended for the benefit of whom? The church.
No. No. It's definitely no. Definitely it's.
Not worried about the tone. I'm worried about laws of nature being suspended. If the lame walk, the sick are healed, the dead were raised, demons are expelled, that's not supposed to happen. So if that stuff is happening for the benefit of the church, what do I start to do? It causes the reader to question the events described in the first part of the sentence. Did that stuff really happen? I'm not worried about if you got the question wrong. Do you understand how that phrasing, laws of nature, were suspended, frequently suspended, for the benefit of the church, allows then for a person maybe to wonder, did that really happen?
and again, I'm not getting into the whole faith philosophical conversation about religious views, but within the context of the passage, do you see that relationship between saying frequently suspended for the benefit and how it could cause the reader to maybe question? Or did we already give up on this passage?
I read the first line, saw the word supine, and
Well, then, I mean, and this is where you need, like, there are going to be passages where you just have to fight through it, and you do the best that you can. And if that means getting 5 out of those 15 passages, that means, well, those 5 questions that I'm going to get right, I can at least try to come up with an argument where I can understand the arrangement in which the sentences are put, that I can maybe recognize the effect that one sentence has upon the another. The supine, there's only so much that you're going to be able to do with words that you don't know. But I would say, how does this sentence play off the previous one, which we had for number 14? That's one where I would hope you could kind of at least fight through it and start to see where maybe some relationships taking place. Line 10, the awful spectacle refers specifically to which of the following? So what this question is asking you to do is in line 10, where you do have the phrase, the awful spectacle, literally what is that making reference to? If you were to read awful spectacle independent of a passage, are you going to know what they mean by it? Probably you're not going to have a clue. Where within the passage would you expect the awful spectacle, quote unquote, to be answered? Are you going to get it before awful spectacle, or would you expect after awful spectacle for them to go into details of what it means? Think about how you would use pronouns. If you use the word it, what do you have to do before you use the word it? You need to identify it early on so that if I make reference to the iPad, it is a wonderful piece of technology, I know what it is. Same thing is going to kind of apply for the awful spectacle, but the sages of Greece and Rome turned aside from the awful spectacle and pursuing the ordinary occupations of life and study appeared unconscious to any alterations in the moral or physical government of the world. I'm going to be looking at something that's probably coming before. What has he just spent really 2 lines discussing before he uses the word awful spectacle? He's coming up with what we were mentioning, use of the word miracles or the miraculous Christian prodigies, which we have for E. It's an antecedent question. Here's a phrase. What does it refer to? More often than not, it's going to refer to something that just happened before, and that's going to be those prodigies that were being described.
When you say miracle, is that M-I-R-A-C-L-E? Miracle?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if I've ever heard it pronounced miracle. Is that the correct way to pronounce it?
As opposed to like a miracle?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe.
What do you put on your pancakes?
Syrup.
Or do you put syrup?
I put powdered sugar, syrup, and strawberries.
Subject of appeared unconscious, line 11. So within that sentence, essentially, who or what would be appearing unconscious within that sentence? As 63% of you have stated, it would be the sages. The sages, and what's a sage? Wise person, teacher tends to be a sage. So the wise appeared unconscious to these things. Not the church, not the countries or empires of Greece and Rome, but the people are the ones, the sages of Greece and Rome appeared unconscious to any alterations of their world all around them. 19, difficult question, but also one where once you start to figure out what the passage really means, I think does become a little bit easier, if this will let me go on to the next one. There we go. In the context of the passage, which of the following can be inferred from the sentence that begins,
even this miraculous event from line 15. So, even this miraculous event, which ought to have excited the wonder, the curiosity, and the devotion of mankind, passed without notice in an age of history and science. So we're taking a look at this event, which we get mentioned with the preternatural darkness of 3 hours. Notice it gives us a footnote, which means at the time of Christ's death on the cross. So, context of the passage, it can be inferred, which is going to be an educated guess. A and E are the two that are jumping out here. Authors criticizing mankind for lack of attention, or if such miraculous event had really occurred, it would have been noticed by the eminent historians. It is one of those two. And it's not going to be B, C, or D. Take a look at the context of the other question. Laws of nature frequently suspended. So we're looking at miracles by... It seeks to persuade the reader to believe in an age of miracles relating, it causes the reader to question the events described in the first part. The prodigies themselves have been referred to as the awful spectacle. So the chances are, where does the writer Gibbon fall on the spectrum of did these things happen or these things did not? Miracles are being referred to as awful spectacle. He's trying to get the reader to question the validity of them. So he's probably going to be arguing that if such an event had occurred, it would have been noticed by the eminent historians, which you get for E. A would mean if he's criticizing the scientists, then he thinks the scientists are wrong, incorrect. But the tone, the word choice that he's using, that would not pop up where he seems to be criticizing. He's more of going laws of nature suspended for the church. It's going to be more of a critical attitude towards the church itself, which is why he gets excommunicated by Rome for writing this in his book, The History of the Roman Empire. Which of the following best restates the meaning of the word intelligence in line 20? So basically, you would be taking these words, if you were to substitute them in for intelligence, which would be the correct response? So it happened during the lifetime of Seneca and the elder Pliny, who must have experienced the immediate effects or received the earliest intelligence of the prodigy. They would be receiving the earliest, and 60% agree, reports. The evidence, the information, not the codes, not the intellect, not the intuition, not the substance, but the reports, which, again, you're looking at this from a scientific standpoint, reports is going to make a little bit more sense. 21, the clause, which the indefatigable curiosity could collect, modifies or goes back to referencing which of the following? Seneca, Pliny, prodigy, work, phenomenon. So we take a look at 22, 23. Each of these philosophers in a laborious work has revealed all the great phenomena of nature, earthquakes, meteors, comets, and eclipses, which his indefatigable curiosity could collect. We got 4 answers, all with 20% or higher. B, C, D, and E all have 21% or higher. Noah, you were on your hot streak of like 5 in a row or something. So what'd you say? What is he trying to collect? Which his indefatigable curiosity could collect information about. It's describing, by saying modify, basically means describe. Each of these philosophers in a laborious work has recorded all the great phenomenon of nature, earthquakes, meteors, comets, and eclipses, which his indefatigable curiosity could collect. What was he trying to collect? He was trying to collect information about the phenomena, which would be answer E.
Are you kidding me? Oh.
He's collecting phenomena which his indefatigable curiosity could collect. It's referencing back to that phenomena itself.
Mr. Campbell, go away.
Look away. 22. Most likely reason that Pliny failed to mention the greatest phenomenon to which the mortal eye has been witness since the creation of the globe. If the laws of nature are being suspended for the church, if all these prodigies are awful spectacles, if the elders of the time, the sages, have not recorded, and these are points that he's been trying to make over and over and over again, then we would be bound to assume that, according to the reader, in the author's view, such phenomenon never occurred. That darkness that would take place would not happen.
Yeah.
There's not anything mentioning that Pliny is out to get Christians. It's just simply that he does not make record of it. He makes record of everything else that takes place, whether it involves Caesar's death, whether it involves these eclipses and whatnot. It's not that he is aware of these things and therefore he's not going to report it. No such argument like that gets presented, but he would only be recording things that do happen, and therefore if he's not recording it, then the argument would be that it has not occurred according to the author. Which of the following is a restatement of the phrase singular defect of light? Keyword, restatement. When do you restate something? I mean, if you restate it, that means you are stating it again. So, which is the restatement of singular defect of light, which is taking place here in line 28. So if it's a restatement, it can't be 24 and it can't be 25 because those are coming before line 28. So my restatement has to be either C, D, or E, just simply based on that use of restatement and the line numbers that pop up. And the correct answer for this one ends up being D, season of, hold on, there we go. D, season of obscurity.
Wait, how would it be E?
Good question.
Okay.
But he contends himself with describing the singular defect of light which followed the murder of Caesar. When, during greatest part of the year, the orb of the sun appeared pale and without splendor. This season of obscurity, what's he going back to when there is not, or I'm sorry, which is the singular defect of light, that season. This season of obscurity is going back to that defect of light. This time, that's totally different than anything else that's going back. If you have...
I would have thought it would have been E because it's a defect of light, so it's talking about darkness.
which cannot surely be compared with the preternatural darkness of the Passion. Notice these are two different events. You have the death of Caesar, and then he's making reference to Passion, the time of his... That can't be a restatement of it if it's a totally separate event that's taken place.
Have a good night.
You too. And then last one was C.
If I'd have marked down my answers, I think I would have gotten them right, but that was my fault.